Usually that's, yes. Good morning, everybody. The last time I gave a talk, I mentioned the warrior in the garden parable, and it led to some interesting discussion and some interesting investigation, and I thought I would share some of it. I wanted to start with a quote from Shaolin monk, and he said that in this life, it is never a bad thing to be compassionate and strong. What I think is, it's a great quote and I love it. What I think is funny is that those two things are not actually different. Your strength is needed for you to be really compassionate. Otherwise, you just get blown off course and you're all over the place. So compassion is strength, but I think a lot of times people feel like they are different things. I also, when I talked about the warrior in the garden parable, I saw some faces, and I had some conversations after that talk with people who felt put off by that or didn't feel like it resonated. And I thought that was really interesting. And at the same time, when I mentioned that most of the hardest battles we face are those that we have internally, our own demons and our own things. Jaku mentioned that a Tibetan teacher had often talked about that being the true meaning of a warrior. And I thought there's really something there. I want to look into that. The warrior concept has kind of always been paired. It has a very interesting relationship with Zen practice. So Shaolin, they practice a style of Chan meditation, which is the Chinese word for Zen. And to the point that Bodhidharma, who, if you're a Zen student, is a very big figure in your life, is legendarily the founder of Kung Fu. The legend is that he went to the Shaolin temple, saw that the monks were kind of out of shape, and he gave them these martial exercises to do so they could have good, strong bodies, so they could have lots of meditation practice. That's pretty much debunked at this point. Historians know that the Kung Fu arts were happening by the time Bodhidharma showed up, which also means that those arts were around when Dogen went to China, and he probably saw some of this. And then, of course, if you watch any TV or movies, you know that samurai and Zen have had a very interesting relationship in Japan. And it's interesting why is there this pairing? Why is this mindset? Especially because they can feel very, very opposed. So I'm going to read to you the parable of the warrior in the garden, and then I'm going to talk about a few different things. And we think the quote of this is actually from China. It's a little disputed. Everybody kind of claims it at this point, but the earliest record we have is from China. So it says that a student is practicing martial arts and he goes to his teacher and he says, "You're always talking about cultivating inner peace, but you're teaching us how to fight. How does that work?" And the teacher says, "It is far better to be a warrior tending his garden rather than a gardener at war." And so how do we break that down? So, like I said, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, he was an influential Buddhist teacher. He actually founded Naropa Institute, Colorado, if anyone's ever heard of that university. He says that internal struggle is actually the true meaning of being a warrior. And he gave us a lot of, he talked a lot about it. He wrote a couple books about it. A lot of his lectures were recorded and compiled. So he had a lot to say about it. And he just said that being fearless and brave in the face of vulnerability and emptiness is really what that means. And so I want you to stop and think about, what do we associate with the mindset of the warrior? I think people would say brave, maybe fearless, determined, willing to sacrifice. The mindset piece is really that kind of that guts, that fighting, that really internal drive. And I think some people might resonate well with this idea of a warrior, and some people might reject it or feel uncomfortable. And that's okay. And what I found is that when I started reading and writing and thinking and sitting, because all of that goes into my process for working on a talk, there are really kind of two threads that emerged for me that I want to talk about. One is this idea of the bodhisattva warrior, that spiritual warrior that's facing their own kind of internal struggles. And the other is the person that knows violence, knows their own capacity for violence, knows their own capacity for anger, for ill will, for a very kind of I don't like this energy, and what they do with it. I think there's kind of two parts. So especially since there are a few new people, the Bodhisattva warrior is the person that, and I'm going to use the Tibetan definition, is the one who combats the universal enemy, which is ignorance and delusion that leads to suffering. And they do so for the benefit of all beings. So the Bodhisattva is someone who wants to wake up with and for everybody, everything together. It's not an isolated practice. So what Trungpa is talking about is the person that is determined, that has that warrior mindset to wake up with and for everyone. And then, like I said, the other way we can talk about warrior is the person that has maybe touched or gotten to know their own capacity for violence. And I want to define violence, because I think for a lot of people that can be physical violence. You punch somebody, you kick somebody, you hit them in the head. But there's also emotional violence. You know, you can say very nasty words that are very hurtful. You can be passive aggressive in a way that cuts someone down. You can close yourself off and isolate those other people. And I want to be very clear that self-violence is a big part of what I'm talking about today. I don't know about you, but I think I have probably hurt myself far more than anyone else has ever been able to hurt me on an emotional capacity. And if you find yourself through this talk struggling to connect when I'm talking about violence, whether it's self-violence or violence towards other, I would say that's okay. Everyone I've ever met has those capacities. But if you're really struggling, in Buddhism, there are kind of the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. So if you're really struggling, just pick your poison. And I think everything that I'm going to talk about probably works. So regardless of what we're talking about, we have to be clear about what we mean when we say warrior and warrior mindset and practice. So I'm going to give you Trungpa's definition of what a warrior is. He says, warriorship here does not refer to making war on others. Aggression is the source of our problems, not the solution. Here, the word warrior is taken from the Tibetan pawo, which literally means one who is brave. Warriorship in this context is the tradition of human bravery or the tradition of fearlessness. I'm going to read that again, mostly because I muddled it up. Warriorship here does not refer to making war on others. Aggression is the source of our problems, not the solution. Here, the word warrior is taken from the Tibetan pawo, which literally means one who is brave. Warriorship in this context is the tradition of human bravery or the tradition of fearlessness. And I do think that bravery and fearlessness both need to be included, because sometimes we are really afraid and we do it anyway. So that's really important. So I want you to remember that we are talking about mindset, not skill set. The ability to hurt someone is not what we're talking about. The ability to make war is not inherently superior than the ability to garden or take out the garbage or do the dishes. We're talking about mindset, that determination, that bravery. Because as I made a little note to myself, because it's still Black History Month, and Shinshu recently was talking about Martin Luther King Jr. And I would challenge anyone here to say that that man was not a warrior. I think of doctors and nurses that I know. I think of single moms that I know. I think of anybody facing challenges and getting out of bed and going and doing it anyway. And those people are warriors. It's not about hurting somebody else. It's about that determination, that bravery. And I would add, especially because I come from a martial arts background, that there is a certain dignity to the carriage of a warrior, the human dignity that we're all capable of. And it is something we express when we engage in the posture of Zazen. I think often we talk about sitting Zazen as an expression of enlightenment, but I think there's also something to be said for sitting Zazen as an expression of that dignified carriage that humans are capable of. And regardless of which definition of warrior kind of calls to you, or if none of them do and you're thinking about one of the other poisons, interconnection is the piece that they all have in common. You can't be a warrior in this world without being in this world. You can't interact with your demons and everybody else around you without being in the world. Even if you're thinking about violence, you can't actually engage in anything love, hate, anything in between without being in this world. So interconnection, regardless of the definition that you find yourself drawn to, is really key. So Trungpa really focuses on fearlessness in his writings on this subject, and I find that really compelling. But I also want to discuss responsibility and humility as it relates to the warrior mindset in spiritual practice and in life. Responsibility, when I break it down, has three aspects: to know violence and choose cultivation, to know violence and choose to protect, and to know violence and choose to transform that. So the first aspect is the responsibility to know your own capacity for violence, including what can trigger it, and be capable of choosing cultivation instead. So we go to work, we're working with our spouse, we go to the gas station and somebody upsets us, something happens that we don't like. We kind of have to know what those instinctual responses are. You can't make a choice if you are unconscious or trapped in fear and reaction. In hard situations, if you are stuck in lash out, then you are engaging in uncontrolled violence, even if you're just lashing out at yourself. If you pull up to the wrong side of the car, right at the gas station, and you start calling yourself terrible names, you are lashing out. You are engaging in uncontrolled violence towards yourself. There's a Zen teacher, Sally Chico Tisdale, who wrote a wonderful article. I absolutely recommend you read it. It's called Warrior Mind. And she was talking about being kind of a middle-aged woman and feeling unsafe in the world and deciding to take a really hardcore self-defense class. And she was brutally honest and vulnerable about what she experienced when she was going through that. And at one point she said, "I felt fear, fear, fear. When he pulled me down, and then I felt an icy rage. The me that is terrorized lashes out in hurt and hurts back. That small self, which so desperately is afraid to die, which sees death and injury everywhere in this uncertain world, is capable of mindless rage." I've always found that to be true. When I'm stuck in fear, I'm definitely capable of that rage. So she's talking in the context of a self-defense class, but that fear and lashing out can happen anytime our ego is threatened, and emotional violence towards self or others can occur so easily. I think hopefully at this point, most of us are much more in danger of emotional violence than physical violence. So I think that begs the question, how do we choose? How do we get to a place where we can choose? And the answer that came up for me was the precepts. The precepts are how we choose. And I know this will be review for most of you, but there are some new people, so I thought I would write them down. So in Buddhism, we have precepts. They're not commandments. Nobody's going to hit you with lightning from on high, but it's a guide. Like it says, your life will probably suck a little less, and other people's lives around you will probably suck a little less if you try these things. And so the precepts are: respect life, don't kill; be giving, don't steal; honor the body, do not misuse sexuality; manifest the truth, do not lie; proceed clearly, do not cloud the mind; see the perfection, do not speak of others' faults and blames; realize self and others, do not elevate the self and blame others; give generously, do not be withholding; actualize harmony, do not be angry. There's another version that I like, which is do not harbor ill will. And to me, that sense of that safe harbor, that protected place where we can bring our ill will in and just like feed it and water it and let it grow, I think that's very common for humans. It is for me. It's something I have to work with. And then do not defile the three treasures. So to me, if I engage in the practice of trying to follow these precepts, I tend to do a little better, fall into this trap a little bit less. And if you're engaging with this, that reflexive energy that arises does transform. So when we talk about how do we not get trapped and lash out mindlessly, how do we choose? The precepts are how we choose. The second aspect of responsibility in dealing with the self that knows violence is choosing to use our abilities to protect. This is often where the difference between aggression and assertion comes in. Your bodhisattva vow cannot be wimpy. We can't say we're going to wake up with and for all beings, maybe tomorrow, if I feel like it, if I had a good breakfast, if I'm in a really good mood. So we have to be assertive, we have to be strong, but not aggression. Hate and aggression doesn't need to be there, but we do need to be able to act and act decisively. You pull the little kid out of the way of the onrushing car. Hating the kid or the driver serves no purpose. Makes things worse, but we still have to act. We must step forward and engage wholeheartedly. If we're in a group and someone makes a racist, sexist, transphobic comment, what do? Do we protect them? What if we don't like that person? Do we protect them anyway? Can we see ourselves in both the attacker and the person we want to protect? Can we protect ourselves? In martial arts, one of the things that I talk about the difference between aggression and assertion. Sometimes people, when they're sparring, when they put on gear and they're fighting, they can struggle to act decisively. They hesitate. It's hard for them to hit someone. It's hard for them to step in the right spot. And some people think the solution is to generate an aggressive mind. And I always say that that is wasted energy and not right. Assertion is you step in the right place, you throw the right blow, you make the right block. Assertion, you act, but you don't need an aggressive mindset. If you get angry, your skill goes down. It doesn't work. So even when we're protecting, we want to be assertive, not aggressive. A few weeks ago, we got Zoom bombed when I was sitting in the tech seat. And I felt very keenly my responsibility to protect the Sangha from people getting online and using profanity, and they started trying to put violent imagery on the Zoom. And I felt very keenly my inability to protect everyone. And that hurt. My heart was sore at the idea that the people that I was here to help were having violence visited upon them. At the same time, hating those kids that were doing that was just going to compound my own suffering, and it wasn't going to serve any purpose. I wasn't going to be better at protecting the Sangha because I hated those kids. They're kids. But I did act decisively. I shut down the Zoom and we restarted it with the password and a waiting room. We did what needed to be done, but we did not engage in aggression. If we see a company destroying the environment, what do? We write letters, we march in protest, we boycott. But again, hate doesn't serve. It's going to increase the suffering on all sides. And I think this is really important. Can we be present without the armor of anger? Anger can make you feel less afraid sometimes. Again, in martial arts, a lot of people, when they're afraid of an opponent or a situation, they get angry. That's their armor against the fear. But again, can we not do that? That's hard. That's scary. That's where that warrior mindset comes in. All of that said, I'm not a pacifist. And what I mean by this is that no one has the right to visit their violence upon me or the world, like the Zoom bombing. We still do what needs to be done. This also means that my mind doesn't get to visit violence upon me or the world. I have a responsibility to try to keep my own stuff in check, not to hurt myself, not to lash out at other people. And that kind of takes us to the third aspect of responsibility with the dealing with the self that knows violence, which is transforming that energy. I think it's true that as we practice, for most people, anger towards the self and others can diminish, right? We get more stable, we get more open. At the same time, I don't like this energy is going to keep arising. There are things we don't like. There are situations that are unjust. When we feel that energy, how do we manifest it? Maybe anger and that urge towards violence, maybe that transforms into a fierce determination to wake up with everybody else. My first teacher, McDonald Roshi, I didn't meet him until he was in his 80s. And he was an older gentleman by the time I met him. But he was talking about how he went in for heart surgery and whatever drugs they put him on. I think I've told this story before. He said, Mark, it's the first time in my adult life I had no sex drive. He said it was very disorienting. This is a man who had been celibate for 50 years. But he said, that drive within me, that urge was removed. And that energy that wasn't there anymore. I was very disoriented without it. He wasn't acting out on it, but it was still a part of him, and he had worked with that, and he had transformed that into an energy and a life of practice. But it was still weird for him to have it taken away. And so I think that's something that we can work on with anger. Jinshu, I should have set a timer. I have no idea how long I've been going. So all of this that we're talking about, this working with the self that knows anger, that knows violence, that knows hate and ill will, that can be really scary. And so that's why I think fearlessness is emphasized so much. So Trungpa explains that to be a warrior means to manifest the bravery to be without self-deception and the courage to believe in the limitless kindness of others. And that can definitely be hard sometimes. He compared it to finding that warrior's mindset, similar to the practice of a samurai. Training the mind is just as, if not more important than being physically prepared for battle. And that made me think about my early experiences with the idea of empty of inherent existence. This self is empty of inherent existence. Or meditation, if you sit long enough, everything comes up. You can't hide from yourself if you sit long enough. Every embarrassing, disgusting thought, every mistake I made that my mind wanted to replay 100 times in one period of Zazen, every way I've messed up, everywhere I failed, that can all be really overwhelming. And so everybody that shows up day after day and sits on the cushion and is willing to face that is engaging in that warrior mindset. And the Buddha really gives us an example of this. So probably everyone knows, but I'm going to tell you the legend anyway. The Buddha left home and traveled around and studied with a bunch of teachers. And then one day he sits under a tree and says, I am not moving until I wake up. So he sits down and he has this determination. And then Mara, who is the demon of delusion and ego. And it really doesn't matter if you take this as a literal demon or a metaphor for our own messy junk inside. Doesn't matter. Buddha sits down and says, I'm not going to wake up. And then Mara comes and says, first he shows up and says, oh, your family's in trouble. You have to go. Right? Fear comes up. No, I'm going to sit. Says, Mara, I see you as Mara. And then he attacks him with armies and arrows and fire. And Buddha says, no, Mara, I see you as Mara. And then he sends rain and rocks and ashes and volcanoes and all this scary stuff. And Buddha sat. And then he sent his daughters of desire. And he said, I'm going to sit. And I want you to think about times maybe you sat down and you've had all these emotions crashing on you and the urge to get up and run away, or the urge to get angry about it or escape into a fantasy. Right? To sit there in the face of all that takes warrior mind and heart. But the Buddha did not try to destroy. He did not hate Mara. He did not even reject Mara. He just said, Mara, I see you as Mara. This is the most important battle, the most scared, the most pain I think that most people are likely to face is this internal stuff, fear. Fear of losing ourselves, fear of losing a loved one, fear of losing a job, fear of change. Scary stuff. So Tisdale mentioned something else that I wanted to include, and I think this is about Zazen, but if you're a martial artist, I think this makes sense too. Learning to fight correctly has given me not only control, but the security needed to fight only as much as necessary and no more. This is true warrior mind. So to me, what that means is we sit and we learn how to be stable in the face of all that shit. And then we can act from a place of choice, from a place of cultivation. So again, Tisdale is talking in the context of a self-defense class, but what she's describing is not getting caught in fear. When we get stuck in fear and reaction, we cannot make choices. We are pulled around like a bull with the ring in our nose. We shut down, we lash out, we cause harm. At a less dramatic level, maybe we check out food, drugs, sex, binging 50 episodes of a Netflix show, numbing ourselves with the latest cool purchase on Amazon Prime. Anything not to be there. Whether we destroy or we run away, we don't have the ability to make a choice without this warrior mind. Pema Chodron, who is a student of Trungpa and is someone our teachers actually know, gave us this. The image of the warrior is of a person who can go into the worst of the hells and not waver from the direct experience of cruelty and unimaginable pain. So that's our path. Even in the most difficult situations, we do our best to smile at fear, to smile at our righteous indignation, our cowardliness, our avoidance of vulnerability. I'm going to read that again, and then I'm going to have something to say about it. The image of the warrior is of a person who can go into the worst of hells and not waver from the direct experience of cruelty and unimaginable pain. So that's our path. Even in the most difficult situations, we do our best to smile at fear, to smile at our righteous indignation, our cowardliness, or avoidance of vulnerability. there's a metaphor that I really like in Zen. It's the mountain. So there's this idea that we work on our equanimity, our balance. We're a mountain, and when the rain comes, the storms come, the clouds come, and the snow comes, and the sun comes, we are able to be stable, right? The mountain is there regardless of what comes, and that's good. But what Trungpa and I think what Pema is talking about, and in my own experience, is that there is kind of like another step, and that's when the mountain is able to let the weather go through it. It does not hold itself apart, but allows the rain, wind, sun, and snow to penetrate and create the mountain, as it also engages in the creation of the weather. You know, with these latest storms, I've gotten to know the Santa Cruz Mountains, which I've lived in for 15 years now, in a new way, because there's snow at my house. And so the weather is creating the mountain, and the sheltered hills that we live in have created a place for that snow to stay, to sit and not melt away. And so in a very real way, the weather and the mountains, they create each other all the time. And so there's one thing to be tense and guarded and keep yourself apart. And there's another thing to be able to be part of that. And so what I would say is think about a charged situation, how it would feel to allow that type of openness. Sometimes we think it's okay for the good stuff. I'm getting married today. I'm so excited. I'm overwhelmed. But we think it's bad for the bad stuff. I have a terrible meeting at work today. That person annoys the tar out of me. And I think we can feel our body shut down, and think about the type of bravery and stability it would take to relax and actually be physically open. I don't know about you, but when I think about that and I think about some of those situations, I can feel the fear arise, like in my body, I can feel it. So that's how much courage and stability. That's the soft heart of the warrior. Trungpa says that the warrior heart is one that feels great love and great grief at the same time. So all of that is really important and really great. And boundaries. And that takes me to the humility piece of being a warrior. You have to have the humility to know where your limits are today. You know, as a martial artist, if you just go fight 50 people, you're going to lose. That would be ridiculous. If you have been training for a year and you go try to have a match with somebody that's been training for 30, you're going to lose. That's ridiculous. Humility is not, though, as some may think, feeling poorly about yourself or placing one's worth below that of others or refusing to acknowledge the good that you do. Humility is recognizing that we're all walking a path, that we all have farther to go. Humility can be very painful. It takes sincere reflection, and we might not always like what we see. But when we're talking about openness and we're talking about compassion and we're talking about bravery, if your compassion does not include yourself, it's incomplete. You're part of the whole situation too. Humility is accepting that there are things that we don't know, things that we can't do on our own. We seek out a teacher or a community. We understand that we live in a context, relationship with all being, not beings, all being, and to understand and accept that some things are out of our control. That we might see the same kleshas, those same issues we deal with, pop up for the rest of our lives. Humility is understanding that we are liberated in the enacting of the vow, not in the success of it, not in the end. It's not a finish line. My profession is a special education teacher. So I work with students that my specialty is autism and emotional disturbance. And being open and vulnerable is really important. You have to connect with those students. And through luck and training, you know, if students threaten to shoot me or stab me or call me names, that doesn't unbalance me much. I can be open and vulnerable with those students. But in my career, 2 times I have worked with legitimately a sociopath. And being vulnerable and open with that person would be stupid. You have to be guarded. So my compassion for any child, that child, is great and should be, but it has to include myself. And so we have to have the humility to understand where our limits are. And maybe our limits will be different tomorrow. But if your compassion does not include yourself, it's incomplete. And humility is really important. Humility tempers those other things I've been talking about, the responsibility, the fearlessness, the bravery. Fearlessness without humility can turn into heedlessness and self-harm. So we have to be very careful. Responsibility without humility can turn into martyrdom and self-flagellation. I have to save everybody else. I have to, give away all my things, and I have to freeze. I have to not take care of myself. Or you can be humble and realize that there are things you can do and things that you can't. So, warrior mindset is not about violence or causing harm. It's actually about being strong enough to do the opposite. To be fearless and stable, to make a choice to take care of ourselves and the people around us, to sit on the cushion every day, to engage in the dignified activity of a Buddha, even when it's really, really hard. Thank you.